What's this guy's name? It's something Hawk. Uh, and it may sound stereotypical, but dude looks like he's done some time. And sounds like he's done some time.
They charged Jesus with sedition. Didn't they do that? They said he was against Caesar. They said he was discriminating because he told his disciples, go not the way of the Gentiles, but rather go through the lost sheep. He discriminated. Don't go near the Gentiles, go through the lost sheep. Go through the oppressed.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Ride, 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 ride. Let me buy when you see me ride. Don't you see me switch lanes? Bitch ass niggas switch sides. Don't hate the riders. Hate the game. Don't hate the riders. Don't hate the riders. Don't hate the riders. Don't hate me, man. Don't hate ass niggas switch sides. Don't you see me switch lanes? Let me buy when you see me ride. Don't you see me switch lanes? Bitch ass niggas switch sides. Don't hate the riders. Hate the game. Don't hate the riders. Don't hate the riders. Don't hate the riders. Don't hate me, man. Don't hate ass niggas switch sides. Don't you see me switch lanes? This king shit. Fuck chains, man. Give me gold bars and gold crowns. If a pimp suck these hoes down, housewives turn porn star. These hoes go too far. I'm guru, this gangster. St. Louis don't fight fair. Put bullet holes in your paint job. Fake hoes get exposed. Eat bitch niggas like takeout. Hate the game, don't hate the riders. They watch us like a stakeout. Lurking on my Instagram. Is that what all that hate about? You acting like I give a damn. Like I don't know these hoes foul. Okay, I'm reloaded. Who wants a war now? Knock, knock, better open up, or we gon' kick the door down. Pine line, stay soldiered up, nigga, you can ask the whole town. I walk on water like Black Jesus, it's rider season. Let me buy when you see me ride. Don't you see me switch lanes? Bitch ass niggas switch sides, don't hate the riders. Hate the gang, don't hate the riders. Don't hate the riders, don't hate the riders. Don't hate me, man. Don't hate ass niggas switch sides. Don't you see me switch lanes? Let me buy when you see me ride. Don't you see me switch lanes? Bitch ass niggas switch sides, don't hate the riders. Hate the gang, don't hate the riders. Don't hate the riders, don't hate the riders. Don't hate me, man. Don't hate ass niggas switch sides. Don't you see me switch lanes? I'm 100 in any lane, like a neurosurgeon, get plenty brain. I'm plenty high, you know how we ride. Don't you see me switching lanes? I'm out my mind like insane. It's my time and I'm not playing. I bury the pharaoh in hot sand. Don't they know this God's land? Fire water, they see me ride. Don't they know this God's plan? If you ain't about it, don't talk about it. Look, bro, that's all that I'm saying. Minivan full of contraband. 415 like a marching band. Got a sweet 16, 500 grams. Wake up now, nigga, not the scam. Wild child, nigga, Taliban. Got a wild style like a spray can. Niggas fake like spray tan. Bitch shady like Ray-Bans. I'm unpersuaded, I can't be faded. I'm underrated, I gotta shine. Fuck the clock, boy, fuck your watch. Ride or die, nigga, now it's time. Let me buy when you see me ride. Don't you see me switch lanes? Bitch ass niggas switch sides. Don't hate the riders. Hate the game, don't hate the riders. Don't hate the riders. Don't hate the riders. Don't hate me, man. Don't hate ass niggas switch sides. Don't you see me switching lanes? Let me buy when you see me ride. Don't you see me switching lanes? Bitch ass niggas switch sides. Don't hate the riders. Hate the game, don't hate the riders. Don't hate the riders. Don't hate the riders. Don't hate me, man. Don't hate ass niggas switch sides. Don't you see me switching lanes?
Isn't it obvious? Well, that is obvious, but we don't know if it's obvious that God is white. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that Jesus did not have blonde hair and blue eyes. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that the images of Jesus that are on prison walls and churches throughout the world are not historically correct, because history teaches us that Jesus was born in a region where the people had color. There's proof in the very Bible that you asked us to read in Revelation 1st chapter, verse 14 and 15, that Jesus had hair like wool and feet.
Please don't do it to him.
of my needs, they royal. All of my needs, they loyal. We ain't the same, we ain't normal. Wait, adore you. Baby girl, I adore you. Pretty face and she loyal. So to fix your crime, girl, you royal. Wait, royal. All of my needs, they royal. All of my needs, they loyal. We ain't the same, we ain't normal. Wait, adore you. Baby girl, I adore you. Pretty face and she loyal. So to fix your crime, girl, you royal. Wait. Woo. I just had to catch my breath. I just had to stack my checks. Shorty got ass, God bless. Damn. I just had to stack my chips. I just had to grab my grip. A lot of niggas mad I'm rich. I'ma have to smash they bitch. Pull up in a maxed out fit. VLN on the logo, moving solo with the stick. Block jumping like a pogo, come and pull up on the strip. Told her pull up and get lit. So she pulled up and she stripped. Damn, I don't need all the attention. I just need all of the pension. Ran the bill up like a piston. Wait, told them but they didn't listen. Fuck it, I teach them a lesson. I ain't got time for the stressing. Damn dog, is you kidding me? You know that we aborigines. I don't give a fuck if you feeling me. As long as you watch how you grilling me. My knee G's making history. Brother some diamonds at Tiffany's. She a carbon queen and she feeling me. So you know she matching my energy. Royal. All of my needs, they royal. All of my needs, they loyal. We ain't the same, we ain't normal. Wait, adore you. Baby girl, I adore you. Pretty face and she loyal. So to fix your crime, girl, you royal. Wait, royal. All of my needs, they royal. All of my needs, they loyal. We ain't the same, we ain't normal. Wait, adore you. Baby girl, I adore you. Pretty face and she loyal. So to fix your crime, girl, you royal. Wait, so to fix your crime, girl, you royal. You ain't got time for the low vibes, but you know I'm feeling your vibe. You a black woman, you go God. You could trust me, girl, I promise. My only choice to be honest. I feel like it's perfect timing. When we hit your party, we getting it lit. Hitting YBs if I need me a fit. He got the sauce, yeah, he got the drip. We gon' keep grinding until we get rich. Smoking exotic, I need me a zip. My aborigines be with this shit. Rushing your shit and I call it a blitz. We tryna find us some money to split. Can't break bread, then you fake them. Free all my guys out the state pen. Her only wet, yeah, it's leaking. She said she want me to eat it. Had to ice her out, now she blinging. Dying for what I believe in. Dropping new heat every season. Call me a vet cause I'm seasoned. Call me a vet cause I'm healing the dogs. Roll me a wood, I ain't talking the law. Brought me some land, about to buy me a mall. Stand up nigga so I cannot fall. Chasing clout, then I won't get involved. Oh, that's your girl, then I'm testing the jaws. Said you was lame, so she gave me the draws. Feeling like Rick Ross because I'm a boss. Royal. All of my needs, they royal. All of my needs, they loyal. We ain't the same, we ain't normal. Wait, adore you. Baby girl, I adore you. Pretty face and she loyal. So to fix your crime, girl, you royal. Wait, royal. All of my needs, they royal. All of my needs, they loyal. We ain't the same, we ain't normal. Wait, adore you. Baby girl, I adore you. Pretty face and she loyal. So to fix your crime, girl, you royal. Wait, royal.
That antisocial gangster.
He is a sort of gangster, you know, because this is a gangster story, but a gangster with a difference because this is a gangster with a conscience.
I don't need no gun to do my thing. Mao Zedong said that power grows out the barrel of a gun. He never said that power was a gun. That's why I don't need no gun to do my thing. What I need is some freedom. What I need is the power to determine my destiny.
Niggas lying, rapping about a life that they never live. Realize these streets crying for a miracle. I'm on fire, I am a miracle. Niggas lying, rapping about a life that they never live. That's why hip-hop's dying. These streets crying for a miracle. I'm on fire, I'll never die. I am a miracle. Niggas lying, rapping about a life that they never live. Realize these streets crying for a miracle. I'm on fire, I'll never die. I am a miracle. Niggas lying, rapping about a life that they never live. Pussy ass niggas. Streets crying for a miracle. I'm on fire, I'll never die. I am a miracle.
What's this guy's name? It's something Hawk. Um, uh, and it may sound stereotypical, but dude looks like he's done some time and sounds like he's done some time.
Whatever, then I'm wrong. You got me now. You got me now. You got me now. Oh, you figured me out. You fucking income fucking poop.
Yo. Peace to the tribes. Peace to the tribes. You already know what it is. Broadcasting live from the Republic of Atlantis. It's the Incredible Hawk. Too high for pigeon to fly, walk on the water, and live in the sky. Let me get the tribe if you feel the vibe. Tonight's topic: Untold History of White Slavery, the Forgotten Faces of Slavery Unveiled. This should be quite interesting. There we go. Let me get some bows and arrows in the chat if you can hear me loud and clear. Shout out 10AC King for that donation. We appreciate your support, brother. It's people like you that make this shit happen, you know what I'm saying? Tribe class is definitely in session. This is going to be very, very interesting. It's going to be a primary sources explosion. You know what I'm talking about? And you know how we rocking. You know how we rock. And let's see what we got. We got some new shit for you too, man. We keep some new shit. And while I'm thinking about it, make sure you go and get your tickets to the rap battle, Bap vs. Lex Vortex, October 31st, Montezuma meets Shaka Zulu. You can go to Aboriginal Powers channel. If you haven't already subscribed, please do that if you're all wise and civilized. And while you're there, go check out his latest video, and I'm sure you'll find the link to the ticket sales. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be a body. You know what I'm saying? We got one of our favorite Pan-Africans. But we know he ain't really no Pan-African. We know he really didn't want to be a slave.
Jack, I can't be no slave, Silky.
Now, as I said in the description, we'll be doing a live book review tonight. It's going to be quite interesting. We're also going to check out an interview of the author of said book. We're also going to be providing a free PDF version of the book as well. Just want to give everybody a chance to get in here, man, before we get it started. You know what I'm saying? Make sure you hit that like and share the live stream, man, so we could get this good knowledge out, because you already know they've been lying to us. But the gig is up.
Number of whites, for example, who were enslaved in North Africa. Number of whites, for example, who were enslaved in North Africa by the Barbary pirates exceeded the number of Africans enslaved in the United States and in the American colonies before that, put together. I know, but nobody is going to North Africa to ask for reparations because nobody is going to be fool enough to give it to them. Here we have intellectuals who can imagine a different history from the rest of the world, even though it's so similar to the rest of the world.
Okay, let's get to our guest. Talk to the house of Israel for a minute, huh? seriously looking for a Christ man, the one who anointed the Lord with the Spirit of the Lord to do his will, I'm that nigga. You not stop faking.
No need to fake. Let's share the live stream, man. Let's see if we can't get some more people in here before we get to dropping these jewels. We're gonna have to get some people in the live stream, and we're gonna share the book. Let's see, where do we want to start? Maybe I'll just start with a brief reading of something I found interesting in the book. I haven't really had a chance to read it cover to cover, so we're gonna really get into it. Shout out Dre Cobb Music in the building. Appreciate you, man, for that generous contribution. That's all love, man. Appreciate y'all, man. As my nigga Ad Power say, don't let Dre Cobb Music be the only one supporting the channel, man. Support the channel. You know what I'm talking about? Straight up. And if you don't want to, you don't have to be here.
Why don't you click your heels together 3 times and go back to Africa?
Thug life. Think it's a game, nigga? Wu-Tang.
I digress. But yeah, I found something very interesting in here. Here, let's share the live stream because I take my own medicine. Live from the Republic of Atlantis. Tap in before we get this lesson started, because they don't want to miss this, man. These are going to be some free jewels, man. We just giving this away like usual, man. You know what I'm saying? We have no agenda. We have no hidden plan. We have no hidden benefactors. This is nothing but the truth. You know what I'm talking about? I'm going to read an excerpt from this book, and the title is They Were White and They Were Slaves. And actually, shout out to A1, the Autonomous one. Make sure you go subscribe to that brother channel. He's an Aboriginal OG, you know what I'm talking about. And I was actually listening to him obliterate one of these remedial unconscious individuals. And he advised that they go look up this book. And as I listened, I took that advice and looked up Michael Hoffman's book, They Were White and They Were Slaves. So shout out to you, brother. And as a result of that jewel that brother shared with me, I will be sharing the jewel with everybody in the live stream and anybody who views this video, because we got the PDF on deck. You know what I'm saying? Because these niggas love to argue. But me, I just love to read. You know what I'm saying?
A funky ass bitch. Why are you trying to jump to a bitch's motherfucking defense?
That is a fabulous question, Reverend X. Why are you trying to jump to a bitch's defense? Why, Pan-Africans? And I really like to discuss further with you who started that movement, but that's not what this build is about. This build is about white slavery. Let's read an excerpt from this terrific book, which is full of primary sources on tonight's topic. The Forgotten Faces of White Slavery. Blank Faces. It says, for the price of a white slave's transport, £6, his owner secured a quote-unquote head right on the land. Now, this is actually, just to give you a little spoilers alert, this is explaining how they actually just took the land. You know what I'm saying? They kind of finessed these people. And this is part of the reason that we had to deal with all this savagery. Of course, we were dealing with savage convicts and orphans with motherfucking mental problems and shit at this point. Not to mention, there was a huge opium addiction that was to proceed. Or was it proceed? Foreseed? After, nigga. All right. After the Civil War, niggas was strung out on opium and shit. You know what I'm saying? So that was a big issue. But I digress. Let me read this and then we'll get into some more jewels. This is as I said, an excerpt from the book They Were White, They Were Slaves by Michael Hoffman. And here it says, for the price of a white slave's transport, £6, his owner secured a quote-unquote head right to the land, which was supposedly intended to go to the quote-unquote servant, but which was instead combined with the land supposedly set aside for other white slaves and formed into an estate which would multiply in value. By this means, and with an occasional additional fee to an English merchant or quote-unquote spirit who provided the landowner with kidnapped extra white slaves, the plantation owner of colonial Americas played monopoly with the fertile valleys and wooded uplands of Maryland and Virginia. Meanwhile, the rightful owners of the land lay in paupers' graves or shackled for life. The monopolistic grip on the land market was detrimental to all white laborers. Says, those white slaves who did not manage to obtain their freedom after 30 or 40 years as chattel were swindled out of the spectral quote-unquote freedom dues of acreage, left to exist as landless peasants and scorned as quote-unquote hillbillies and white trash. In spite of decades of labor under monstrous conditions of hardship. One would think that some of the few survivors went on to become prominent leaders of the colony or were founders of great families. This does not appear to be the case. Some were doubtless the progenitors of the poor white trash, quote unquote, of the South. Many of the free whites who had descended from the poorer elements of the white servant class became objects of charity. All right? So we're just going to get a little idea of what's really going on in the world.
Tom, next caller. You don't like it? Kiss my ass, you don't like it. It's my house. Tom, next caller.
Story of the enslavement of white people in early America. Mr. Hoffman was educated at Oswego State Teachers College and Hobart College. He is a former reporter for the Albany and Buffalo, New York bureaus of the Associated Press and a former director of the Institute for Historical Review. He is the author of 3 other books, by the way, and has published also a bi-monthly history newsletter entitled Revisionist Researcher. And Mr. Hoffman, are you with us tonight?
Yes, I am.
Appreciate you being with us tonight. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
Good. Well, you've done magnificent work on a book that, as I don't have to tell you, is not politically correct.
That's right. It isn't at all.
How's it being received out there?
Well, it's being received as sort of a samizdat publication. People are ordering it through bookstores, and there's a growing audience for it. We've sold several thousand copies, and I think that the more publicity that it gets, eventually the audience will grow nationwide and worldwide, God willing.
Well, let's start talking about it. I got some questions to ask you. Now, we've been told that black people have been enslaved and oppressed in America for 400 years, and that the American people need to make reparations to blacks. Perhaps sometimes it's suggested cash payments. And as a result, they're saying of this black enslavement, that's the least we can do. Now, you've written a book claiming that it was the white people who were actually the first slaves in America. So who owes who, Mr. Hoffman?
Well, white people don't owe anyone, Pastor Peters. The fact of the matter is that white youth today are taught that black slaves and Mexican peons and Chinese coolies built this country, while the vast majority of the whites lorded it over them with a whiplash in one hand, and a mint julep in the other. But the documentary record tells a very different story. Up to 1/2 of all the arrivals in the American colonies were white slaves, and they were America's first slaves. These whites were slaves for life long before blacks ever were. And this white slavery was even hereditary. White children were born to white slaves, and they were also enslaved. Whites were auctioned on a block with children sold and separated from their parents. Wives were sold and separated from their husbands. Meanwhile, you had free black property owners walking the streets of northern and southern American cities, while white slaves were being worked to death in the sugar mills of Barbados and Jamaica in the West Indies and in the tobacco plantations of Virginia. So the establishment has created this misnomer of indentured servitude to explain away and minimize the fact of white slavery. But if you really read even the establishment historians, if you read their footnotes, even they have to concede, at the very least in the 17th century, that black slavery was almost non-existent and that whites were the overwhelming majority of slaves in America in the 17th century.
Where does the word slave itself come from? Isn't it exclusively in reference to the experience of black people in bondage?
No, it isn't, Pastor Peters. Actually, the word slave derives from the white nation of people known as the Slavs, or the Slavic people. And they were enslaved longer than the entire history of the United States. The Slavic people were slaves about twice as long as blacks were slaves in North America. So the actual definition of that word pertains to the experience of white people in bondage, yet the politically correct historians tell us that we're not allowed to refer to whites as slaves. So it's really a huckster's game that's at work there.
It's that old wordsmith game, isn't it?
That's correct.
How did the enslavement of whites in America begin anyway?
Well, the enslavement of whites in America really actually has its roots in Great Britain, because it's really a very complex story. Of course, the history of whites in bondage goes all the way back to the ancient world. The ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, of course, held slaves, and the majority of those slaves were white. This has pretty much been the essential experience of all people throughout time, and it's ludicrous to say that it's exclusively the experience of blacks. However, if we bring this up to the American colonial period, we must go to Britain, because, of course, America was a colony of Britain. And Britain began its decline in the 16th century, shortly after the reign of Henry VIII. It really, I would say, it went into decline under his son, the very weak boy king, Edward VI. And in the era of Edward VI, we see that usury, or the charging of interest on loans, that had been illegal in Britain. And during the reign of Edward VI, he was being manipulated by his counselors, and that's when usury was legalized in Britain in 1548. And from that point onward, you also had the beginnings of the enclosure laws, which was the taking away of the right of the English people to farm freely in these common lands which had existed. They were basically swindled out of their land. And from that, you had a pauperization process beginning. You had the first real beginnings of a class of white people in Great Britain known as paupers. And once you had that, of course, you had all the social evils that came along with the paupers. Now, pauperization began in a large-scale way under Queen Elizabeth I, and this is when you had the first welfare laws in Britain being passed. And when white people who had formerly been yeomen, who had been freemen, now there had been a class of white slaves in early Britain known as the villains, from which we get the disparaging term of villain. It was spelled a little bit differently with an E on the end instead of an A. However, you still had a majority of the whites able to farm and able to live as free men. Now, more and more, the majority of whites were changing over from free men and yeomen and landholders and farmers over to this class, this formal class of paupers. And that's what began the roots of white slavery, because once you had paupers, you had developing the workhouse system, which was the way to manage the paupers, which was to enslave them in an institution where they could be controlled, which was the workhouse system in Great Britain.
That's an amazing story. In fact, it's so amazing that I know there are some people just using the understanding cognitive dissonance that they're rejecting some of the things you're saying because it seems so fantastic that they've never heard this. What happened to whites in Great Britain if they opposed the king or they were defeated in battle? You know, in high school today and college,
welfare laws in Britain being
We're going to rewind a little bit, man, bring that back a little bit, man. I know it's a whole lot of motherfucking jewels in there. I really don't want to stop, man, because I got so much for y'all tonight. I told you it's going to be a goddamn primary source explosion. So we're gonna have the primary sources. Right now, we're listening to the author of the book. They were white and they were slaves. So we're going to get into the book. I just wanted to, we're going to do some reading. We're going to drop it in the chat. But I just want to give everybody a chance to get in here, man, check this out. And like I say, we still got the rest of this interview, which is just about over. And then we're going to check out the book. And then we're going to have a old interview we found with the author, which is him live in person. So it's going to be pretty lit, you know what I'm saying? As far as this topic and this book, we pretty much got it covered, you know what I'm saying? So make sure you tune in, make sure you share the live stream so we could get this, you know what I'm saying, get these jewels out here. And you know what we doing here at Hawk School?
Giving you more of what you hoping for. You ain't hoping in the Lord, huh? You hoping in vain, material, superficial shit. That's why you can't see me, house niggas.
And when white people who had formerly been yeomen, who had been freemen, now there had been a class of white slaves in early Britain known as the villains, from which we get the disparity of villain. It was spelled a little bit differently with an E on the end instead of an A. However,
you know what I like about this is that we're learning so many things. So many of these words that really come from these people. You know what I'm saying? Like villain, spirit. They call the spirit the motherfucker come take the motherfucker to the ship. Steal them, sell them into bondage. But it ain't about what I got to say. Just pay attention. We're going to let the author, you know what I'm saying, do his thing tonight.
Which was the taking away of the right of the English people to farm freely in the common lands which had existed. They were basically swindled out of their land. And from that, you had a pauperization process beginning. You had the first real beginnings of a class of white people in Great Britain known as paupers. And once you had that, of course, you had all the social evils that came along with the paupers. Now, pauperization began in a large-scale way under Queen Elizabeth I, and this is when you had the first welfare laws in Britain being passed. And when white people who had formerly been yeomen, who had been freemen, now there had been a class of white slaves in early Britain known as the villains, from which we get the disparaging term of villain. It was spelled a little bit differently with an E on the end instead of an A. However, you still had a majority of the whites able to farm and able to live as free men. Now, more and more, the majority of whites were changing over from free men and yeomen and landholders and farmers over to this class, this formal class of paupers. And that's what began the roots of white slavery, because once you had paupers, you had developing the workhouse system, which was the way to manage the paupers, which was to enslave them in an institution where they could be controlled, which was the workhouse system in Great Britain.
That's an amazing story. In fact, it's so amazing that I know there are some people just using the understanding cognitive dissonance that they're rejecting some of the things you're saying because it seems so fantastic that they've never heard this. What happened to whites in Great Britain if they opposed the king or they were defeated in battle? You know, in high school today and colleges, we're told that the whites have been so-called indentured servants, that we do hear about some of indentured servants in America, but never slaves. And I know you address it in the book, and I want you to tell the people about it.
Right. Well, first of all, of course, you had battle captives and people who were opposing the king, or if they lost in battle in the various civil wars and rebellions in Great Britain. Generally, one of their punishments, if they were fortunate enough to escape execution, was enslavement. And what would happen to them is they would be transported. That was in a technical term. It didn't just mean that you were put on a ship, but it was actually a term related to forced deportation from Great Britain. And these various white rebels against the crown were then transported to the British Crown colonies of the West Indies, particularly Barbados and Jamaica, where they were basically worked to death in the sugar mills there. And when white tourists go to Jamaica and Barbados, they're basically going to the scene of a white Holocaust, because most of these white men didn't survive beyond the first couple of years there. However, this enslavement was long-term. It just did not involve only political prisoners. They were basically worked to death in the sugar mills there.
Basically worked to death in the sugar mills.
What happened to them is they would be transported. That was in a technical term. It didn't just mean that you were put on a ship, but it was actually a term related to forced deportation from Great Britain. And these various white rebels against the crown were then transported to the British Crown colonies of the West Indies, particularly Barbados and Jamaica, where they were basically worked to death in the sugar mills there. And when white tourists go to Jamaica and Barbados, they're basically going to the scene of a white Holocaust, because most of these white men didn't survive beyond the first couple of years there. However, this enslavement was long-term. It just did not involve only political prisoners or those who had lost battles, but it also involved the kidnapping, as I will discuss later, of whites off the streets of Great Britain, so that even in the early parts of the...
Okay, let's get to our guest tonight. Our guest tonight is a gentleman by the name of Michael A. Hoffman. He is the author of a recent history book entitled They Were White and They Were Slaves.
All right, let's see what we got here. Oh yeah. Let's fast forward that. We're gonna pause right there. All right, and we're gonna take this time out, you know what I'm saying, to be all wise and civilized and do some reading here. Just to show and prove, you know how we do. I'm going to take this moment to go ahead and share the live stream, man. I want to drop the link to the book, but we need at least 50 people in the stream, man. And then we dropping the link. We pulling up, and you know how we pulling up.
What a punk. What a fool. Mark.
Talk to the house of Israel for a minute, huh? you're really serious and you're looking for a Christ man, the one who's anointed with the Lord, with the Spirit of the Lord to do his will, I'm that nigga. You not stop faking.
We have style, we got flavor, we got rhythm. I mean, the black man in America is the most copied man on this planet, bar none. Everybody want to be a nigga, but nobody want to be a nigga. How about that question?
My bad. Yeah, so we're going to do a little reading. Check out the book. They Were White and They Were Slaves by Michael Hoffman. Then we'll get into his interview. We actually got 2 interviews that we're going to check out. But we're going to do some reading. Let's see what they say. This is new to me. Like I say, it's a live book review. You know what I'm saying? So we checking it out. Tribe. It says, whites were the first slaves in America. The enslavement of whites extended throughout the American colonies, and white slave labor was a crucial factor in the economic development of the colonies. Gradually, hold on 1 second, let me get this a little cooler. Okay. Bam. Let's do this. Bam. Hot shit, peace to the tribe, shut alive, hit the like, subscribe if you're new. Come learn something. Fly with the hawks. Hawks don't fly with pigeons. It's tribe. Gradually, it developed into a fixed system. I'll start from the top. The enslavement of whites extended throughout the American colonies, and white slave labor was a crucial factor in the economic development of the colonies. Gradually, it developed into a fixed system, every bit as rigid and codified as Negro slavery was to become. In fact, Negro slavery was efficiently established in colonial America because black slaves were governed, organized, and controlled by the structures and organizations that were first used to enslave and control whites. Black slaves were, quote unquote, later corners fitted into a system already developed. And you might want to see that on the screen just to know it's real. And this is, of course, an excerpt from Life and Labor in the Old South by Ulrich B. Phillips, page 25 through 26, in case niggas think we don't know what the fuck a primary resource is. Fuck they thought they was playing with.
Motherfucker, ain't no corrupt communication came out of my mouth. You know what the corrupt communication is? That's when you talk about the devil. He the devil. Your motherfucking communication is corrupted. Motherfucker, ain't no corrupt.
I guess my cool ass need to take the loop off. All right. See what else we got here. Like I told you, it's a primary source explosion. The American colonies prospered through the use of white slaves, which Virginia planter John Porey declared in 1619 were our, and I quote, principal wealth. All right. The white servant, a semi-slave, was more important in the 17th century than even the Negro slave in respect to both numbers and economic significance, according to Marcus Jernigan in Laboring and Dependent Classes in Colonial America, page 45. Where mainstream history books or films touch on white slavery, it is referred to with the deceptively mild-sounding title of, let me say that right, with the deceptively mild-sounding title of quote-unquote indentured servitude. The implication being that enslavement of whites was not as terrible or all-encompassing as Negro quote-unquote slavery. but constituted instead a more benign bondage, that of quote-unquote servitude. Yet the terms servant and slave were often used interchangeably to refer to people whose status was clearly that of permanent, lifetime enslavement. Quote-unquote, that's an account of the English sugar planticons in the British Museum Stowe manuscript written circa 1660-1685, which refers to black and white slaves as quote-unquote servants. The colonies were plentiful supplied with Negro and Christian servants, which are the nerves and sinews of a planticon. In the North American colonies in the 17th and 18th century and subsequently in the United States, servant was the usual designation for quote-unquote slave, according to a compact edition of the Oxford English Dictionary. What? What they thought this was? What we doing, man? The fuck is we doing? Let me get some fly shit, man, for these niggas here, man.
Why don't you click your heels together 3 times and go back to Africa?
What kind of Indian are you?
Like Tonto Indian?
Shinnecock Indian.
Really? You're a Shinnecock?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know you're a Shinnecock.
Could have fooled me.
That's the kind I am.
Hey.
So you should be Big Chief Bastard, not Old Dirty.
His family was here when Columbus landed, huh?
Is that right?
Yes.
So you are not a black man, you're an Indian?
I'm an Indian.
No kidding.
The use of the word servant to describe a slave would have been very prevalent among a Bible literate people like colonial Americans. In all English translations of the Bible available at the time, from Wyclif's to the 1611 King James Version, the word slave, as it appears in the original biblical languages, was translated as servant. For example, the King James Version of Genesis 9:25 is rendered, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be." The intended meaning here is clearly that of slave, and there is little doubt that in the mind of early Americans, the word servant was synonymous with slave. In original documents of the white merchants who transported Negroes from Africa, the blacks were called servants. One notes that the company of royal adventurers referred to their cargo as niggers, Negro servants, servants from Africa. The documentary record debunks the propaganda that slavery was strictly a racist operation, part of a conspiracy of white supremacy, because 1, whites as well as blacks were enslaved. 2, in the 17th century, slaves of both races were called servants. And 3, the colonial merchants of the 17th century America had no qualms about enslaving their own white kindred. And it just goes on and on. Let's read some more. Survey of the various ad hoc codes and regulations devised in the 17th century for the governing of those in bondage reveals no special category for black slaves. During Ligon's time in Barbados, white indentured female servants worked in the field gangs alongside the small but rapidly growing number of enslaved black women. And I'll reiterate, the small but rapidly growing. Okay. In this formative stage of the sugar revolution, planters did not attempt to formulate a division of labor along racial lines. White indentured servants were not perceived by their master as worthy of special treatment in the labor regime. Okay. Do we got to find more? I mean, this is like the end of these niggas on the first page. We ain't even get into the book. Let's go to the beginning and see. Let's read the table of contents. It's a book review, right? Let's start from the top. This has just been gut-wrenching for these guys, I know. Gut-wrenching. It's just the whole history of slavery. I guess we'll check out the cover, and then we'll read the introduction, and then we'll check out some more of the audio. And hopefully we get, some people in the stream, and we're going to share the book. But we got to have some kind of rules, you know what I'm talking about? Straight up.
Thug life. Think it's a game, nigga? Wu-Tang.
There were 2 sorts, first such as there were brought over by masters of ships to be sold as servants, such as we call them, my dear, says she, but they are more properly called slaves. Daniel Defoe, Maul Flanders. This is a history of white people that has never been told in any coherent form, largely because most modern historians have, for reasons of politics or psychology, refused to recognize white slaves in early America as just that. Today, not a tear is shed for the sufferings of millions of our own enslaved forefathers. 200 years of white slavery in America have been almost completely obliterated from the collective memory of the American people. Who wants to be reminded that half, perhaps as many as thirds, of the original American colonists came here not of their own free will, but kidnapped, shanghaied, impressed, duped, beguiled, and yes, in chains? We tend to gloss over it. We'd prefer to forget the whole sorry chapter, according to Elaine Kendall, Los Angeles Times, September 1st, 1985, and I do believe that would be a primary source. Cha-ching! I need like a buzzer, like cha-ching, cha-ching, every time we fuck them up.
And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy my brother.
A correct understanding of the authentic history of the enslavement of whites in America could have profound consequences for the future of the races. We cannot be sure that the position of the earliest Africans differed markedly from that of the white indentured servants. The debate has considerable significance for the interpretation of race relations in American history. Eugene D. Genovese, Roll Jordan Roll, The World the Slaves Made, page 31. Most of the books on white labor in early America are titled with words like white indentured servitude, white bond servant, quote unquote, white servants, quote unquote, etc. It is interesting that white people who were bound to a condition of what became in many cases permanent chattel slavery until death are not referred to as slaves by establishment academics. With the massive concentration of educational media resources on the Negro experience of slavery, the unspoken assumption has been that only blacks have been enslaved to any degree or magnitude worthy of study or memorial. The historical record reveals that this is not the case, however. White people have been sold as slaves for centuries.
Why don't you click your heels together 3 times and go back to Africa?
Ah, this is really gonna hurt. So much, so much. So much, so much. Tonight's topic, Untold History of White Slavery, The Forgotten Faces of Slavery Unveiled. Join us as we lift the veils of American history. Broadcasting live from the Republic of Atlantis. You are not too high for pigeons to fly. Let's see what else we got here. Tribe. They tried to bury us in the dirt. They didn't know we were seeds. Stupid.
The newspapers totally blithely. We're just supposed to take this. We're supposed to be labeled in this way. However, if we look at the etymology of the word, the root of it is a means of poking fun at poor white horrible words as a result.
The red shanks, would that any way tie up with the word rednecks?
Absolutely, yes.
Is that right?
Yes, this is one of the racist terms which the media freely uses. We're often told that the most horrible word, I think this specter was summoned in the O.J. Simpson circus, that the most horrible word in the English language, one of his lawyers said, was the N-word. However, to conscious white people, one of the most horrible words is the word redneck. And this term of derision is bandied about in movies and television and in the newspapers totally blithely. We're just supposed to take this. We're supposed to be labeled in this way. However, if we look at the etymology of the word, the root of it is a means of poking fun at poor white people whose skin would redden in the sun in the West Indies, and they would be called hillbillies, Scotland Johnnies, by blacks and by wealthy whites who enslaved them, red shanks, and eventually this term of derision, this loathsome, contemptible term for poor white people, eventually evolved into the modern day term of redneck. Yes.
That's fascinating. How were the slaves actually enslaved? How were the whites enslaved if they were not just indentured servants?
Well, the indentured servant thing was basically a racket. I mean, there was a minority of people who were in bondage who were fortunate enough to have been indentured servants because, after all, indentured servitude, when it is practiced correctly and legally, is a form of apprenticeship. Someone, as we were told in high school and college, would trade a period of his labor in return for passage over on a boat or in return for instruction in a skilled trade. So that is a legitimate a contract there between a laborer and an employer, and I certainly sanction it. I think it's a good thing. In fact, I'd like to see apprenticeship practiced more today as more and more young people get away from the public school systems and they're homeschooled by their parents, and then as they reach their teens, why it would be quite natural for them to apprentice themselves to a manager or someone who had something to teach them. However, under this euphemism of indentured servitude, Pastor Peters, a tremendous hoax and a tremendous swindle was perpetrated against the poor white people. And that is to say, it functioned in two ways. One, as a cover-up for the actual experience of white people in slavery. In other words, as this slavery grew larger and larger, and the white aristocracy in Britain scrambled for a way to cover it up, they grouped it under the notion of a contract for indenture. Secondly, it functioned as a way of entrapping people. In other words, people would be press-ganged or kidnapped aboard ships, and a spurious indenture would be written out for them, allegedly corresponding to the biblical injunction that no servitude is to go beyond a period of 7 years, and this is where we get the notion of a 7-year limit. In fact, that limit was completely ignored, and these people were referred to as indentured servants. They were even told that they had a contract.
Now, I think it's quite interesting that they're basing their indentured contract on biblical shit. That's where the 7-year contract came from. But now he's gonna tell you how they finessing them out the contract. You know what I'm saying? And how they getting fucked, for lack of better words. I digress.
Where we get the notion of a 7-year limit. In fact, that limit was completely ignored, and these people were referred to as indentured servants. They were even told that they had a contract of indenture, but in fact they were slaves for life. Now, the way this occurred, the real engine of this enslavement in Britain was kidnapping. And again, if we go to our study of words, we find out that the origin of the word kidnapping, which is now a universal term for anyone who steals people, relates to white slavery. If you go to the old dictionaries, you'll find out that the original word was kidnabbing, Nabbing, and it's a specific reference to stealing white children and white adults for servitude in colonial America. And tens of thousands of them were kidnapped from the port cities of England and Scotland. In fact, it got...
All right, and you know we hawking, and we doing a live review, and you know we studying live. You know what I'm saying? Tribe. You know how we rocking. Let me get this. So we're gonna pull up the etymology of that. Just bear with me for a second here. Bear with me.
motherfucker. You the one going, you believe in death, huh? Goddamn murderer. Crucify my blessed brother. But when I find them, I'm gonna get them motherfuckers. You killing me. Next caller.
All right, there we go. Fly shit only. Oh, matter. Speaking of fly shit only, hold on, we got some more fly shit, man. Shout out to everybody that supports the channel, man. You know what I'm saying? What's good? Here's what we got in here, man. Man. The sun is in your eyes. You know what I'm talking about? He said, "Oh, it's no sound right now. No, there should be some sound right now. It's a delay. We'll wait. We'll see."
They charged Jesus with sedition. Didn't they do
You hear that?
They charged Jesus with sedition. Didn't they do that? They said he was against Caesar. They said he was discriminating because he told his disciples, go not the way of the Gentiles.
All right. You got number two. Hold on. I see number two. You can't hear me? For some reason,
century that parents were in great fear to let their children go to the port cities on an errand without their parents or some other adult guardian safeguarding them. And in fact, even if an adult was along, oftentimes that adult would be knocked on the head and put on board the ship. And in my book, They Were White and They Were Slaves, I give many accounts of this mass kidnapping in action. So that was the principal means by which whites were brought to America as slaves. A secondary means was to trick them into the idea that they were going to have a limited contract of indenture for 7 years. But then when they came to America, you see, there was a way to lengthen that 7 years and to violate the biblical injunction against servitude going beyond 7 years. The way that happened was to create a roster of petty offenses. For example, if a white slave was away from his work or away from the plantation for more than a day or even for more than an hour, if the overseer decided that this was an arbitrary absence, they would add on a month of servitude to the white slave's time of service. And through various stratagems and tricks, this adding on went to the point where the people ended up being enslaved for life. And that's the real reality of bondage of whites in America. It's white slavery and not largely indentured servitude.
It's an amazing story, and ladies and gentlemen, this amazing story is told in Mr. Hoffman's book, They Were White and They Were Slaves, The Untold History of the Enslavement of Whites in Early America. The truth of the matter is, whites were the first slaves in America, not blacks. And that the media is not killing. We're carrying this book, and of course I'm offering it on this shortwave broadcast. And if you would like to have this book, They Were White and They Were Slaves, it's available for children, became the property of the master. Now, it depended on which era of colonial law this occurred in. The law became more liberal in the 18th century, in the early 18th century. A child born to a white woman who was a slave would be the slave of the master. If he was female, so he was 18. If he was male, until he was 21. However, in the 17th century, when things were much rougher, their enslavement was still as long as until the age of 31. So this was really dependent on the local situation in the various states. It dates back to an old Roman slave code which decreed partus sequitur ventrum, the condition of the child follows the condition of the mother. This woman who was enslaved in the 17th century when the child follows the condition of the mother. So you see, Roman slave code which decreed partus sequitur ventrum, the condition of the child follows the condition of the mother. So you see, this was really a slave law which we've seen all these heart-rendering Hollywood movies and on Ted Turner's TNT channel and so forth. But what they never tell us is this was first the experience of white people in bondage and only later the experience of some black people in bondage. So yes, white families suffered tremendously under white slavery in colonial America, you bet. You're not saying that there weren't black families later on that also suffered, are you?
No, of course not. I regard the enslavement of blacks as a terrible tragedy for black people, but a worse tragedy for whites, primarily because this country, the Civil War, I think, was partly fought because there were white men in the North who abhorred the idea of using Negro labor to build the country. Congressman David Wilmot was a great Northern congressman who sponsored the Wilmot Proviso, and that said that white men should be the ones who settle the West, because the issue of the South being kind of the white nationalists on the side of the white people, and the Northerners all being race mixers on the side of the blacks, is really not an accurate dichotomy there. It was the issue of the South being kind of the white nationalists on the side of the white people, and the Northerners all being race mixers on the side of the blacks, is really not an accurate dichotomy there. It was far more complex than that. And one of the issues was whether or not the Southern holders of black slaves were going to be allowed to import thousands of blacks into California and Oregon. And a lot of white working men didn't want this to happen, including Congressman David Wilmot. And so basically their attitude towards black enslavement was that it was a curse on America because white men wanted to be separatists. They wanted a separate nation, an all-white nation, and they wanted to do the toil. Now, in fact, they had done the toil because the founding toil of this nation, the great land clearing and swamp clearing, the felling of the trees, was largely done by white pioneers. So that work had been done, but as the financial oligarchy in the South continued to depend on black enslavement, this really troubled the white yeomanry of the United States. So it was a tragedy for both, but I think especially a tragedy for white people. And of course, the most far-sighted of American statesmen, founded in 1830, the American Colonization Society for the deportation of blacks back to Africa. And many black people supported this. And in fact, as you know, Pastor Peters, many blacks continue to support that to this day.
Yes, in fact, I had a black speaker.
Why don't you click your
at one of my
heels together three times and go back to Africa?
The whippings were actually fatal to the auctioning of white slaves. As soon as they came off ships, they were taken like cattle, and their arms were felt and their teeth were examined and so forth. And this has been tremendously suppressed. And people can say the trees was largely done by white pioneers, and they wanted to do the toil. Now, in fact, they had done the toil because the founding toil of this nation, the great land clearing and swamp clearing, the felling of the trees, was largely done by white pioneers. So that work had been done, but as the financial oligarchy in the South continued to depend on black enslavement, this really troubled the white yeomanry of the United States. So it was a tragedy for both, but I think especially a tragedy for white people. And of course, the most far-sighted of American statesmen, founded in 1830, the American Colonization Society for the deportation of blacks back to Africa. And many black people supported this. And in fact, as you know, Pastor Peters, many blacks continue to support that to this day.
Yes, in fact, I had a black speaker at one of my past Christian family Bible camps, Mr. Brock. I don't know if you've heard of him or not.
Yes, I have.
And he's certainly an advocate of it.
Right.
So what you're saying then, Michael, is that virtually every component of what we've come to know as black slavery was first experienced by whites when they were enslaved here in America.
Absolutely. That's absolutely correct. From the fugitive slave law, where whites had a price on their head and were hunted and nearly whipped to death, and in some cases the whippings were actually fatal, to the auctioning of white slaves. As soon as they came off ships, they were taken like cattle, and their arms were felt and their teeth were examined and so forth. And this has been tremendously suppressed. And people can say, well, you know, if this actually happened, why haven't I heard about it? Well, for those of us who are a little bit sophisticated about history, we know that history is rigged and that many historians owe their jobs to how well they play with the party line. But there's also another aspect at work here, and that is the fact that in the late 18th century and throughout the 19th century and even in the early 20th century, because this bondage extends right up into the 20th century, white people were very ashamed if they had a background of servitude. Many of those whites ended up settling in Appalachia. They became very alienated from the fact that in the late 18th century and throughout the 19th century and even in the early 20th century, because this bondage has been tremendously suppressed. And people can say, well, you know, if this actually happened, why haven't I heard about it? Well, for those of us who are a little bit sophisticated about history, we know that history is rigged and that many historians owe their jobs to how well they play with the party line. But there's also another aspect at work here, and that is the fact that in the late 18th century and throughout the 19th century and even in the early 20th century, because this bondage extends right up into the 20th century, white people were very ashamed if they had a background of servitude. Many of those whites ended up settling in Appalachia. they became very alienated from the mainstream of the United States, and they were ashamed of their background. There was no one to come along and champion their cause here. They saw it as a kind of a stigma. Secondly, the aristocracy that had perpetrated this Holocaust against their own kin realized that they committed a great crime, both in the eyes of sacred scripture and in the eyes of common law. And so it was in their interest to cover this up as much as possible. So it's mostly fallen to me to be the one to dig this back up again and bring it to the attention of all people, black and white, so that we can deal with it and so that other researchers and historians can further explore it, because it's a pioneering field and there's a lot of room here for further discussion and investigation.
Where did you start going to find this material? Of course, you've got an excellent bibliography in the back, so I shouldn't ask you that, but why don't you tell the people?
Well, I live here in upstate New York, and believe it or not, New York is not entirely comprised of Manhattan. In fact, we have tried to break off the state. We've tried to make Manhattan the 51st state and make upstate New York, which is largely rural and farms, its own republic. So I'm in a very rural area, and the history here is very rich. Revolutionary War battles were fought, especially the Indian Wars of the American Revolution, with Generals Clinton and Sullivan fighting the Iroquois. And also, I'm quite near to New England. In fact, when I originally became interested in this story, it was by researching Matthew Lyon, who is one of the American Revolutionary War heroes. He was a hero of the Battle of Bennington, Vermont. The famous commander of that, of course, was Ethan Allen. But as I began to dig into Matthew Lyon's story, I discovered that Matthew Lyon was a white slave. He became a very great American politician and a congressman. And in fact, I'm in a very rural area, and the history here is very rich. Revolutionary War battles were fought, especially the Indian Wars of the American Revolution, with Generals Clinton and Sullivan fighting the Iroquois. And also, I'm quite near to New England. In fact, when I originally became interested in this story, it was by researching Matthew Lyon, who is one of the American Revolutionary War heroes. He was a hero of the Battle of Bennington, Vermont. The famous commander of that, of course, was Ethan Allen. But as I began to dig into Matthew Lyon's story, I discovered that Matthew Lyon was a white slave. He became a very great American politician and a congressman, and in fact, he was imprisoned in a famous sedition case after the Americans won their freedom. He was imprisoned by the Federalists, but he became a great and accomplished man. He wrote a book, and he referred to himself as "by the bulls that redeemed me." Apparently, Matthew Lyon had been sold in return for a couple of deer, a couple of male deer, and sold in return for a couple of deer, a couple of male deer, for a couple of deer, a couple of male deer. And I mean, that was the status of white people in the 18th century.
13 stripes. That's a very interesting image there. Tribe, very, very interesting. We have so much more for you this evening. Share the live stream. We still have more to come. It's still going to be lit. It's not going to stop. It's a motherfucking Indian party. You know what I'm talking about? And if you don't like it,
Why don't you click your heels together 3 times and go back to Africa?
We have style, we got flavor, we got rhythm. I mean, the black man in America is the most copied man on this planet, bar none. Everybody want to be a nigga, but nobody want to be a nigga. How about that question?
Peace to the tribes. We got 50 in the chat. So now it's time to bless you. And this is how we're going to play it. I'm going to share the link to to the PDF to the book. They were white and they were slaves. And when you get the link, I need you to put some fire emojis in the chat so I know you got the link, and so we can flood that motherfucker out. So if they wasn't here, they don't get it. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, I said it. That's how we gonna do it. So go ahead and I'm gonna check out the chat. We're gonna let a little more of this video play, and then we're gonna go over the book. We might do a little live Q&A and drop the goddamn the link. You know what I'm saying? So just stay tuned, man. Like I say, it's going up and it's stuck.
Couldn't find his grave, and later on I found out that he wasn't buried in New England at all, but he went down much later in his career after his wife died to the Kentucky-Tennessee area where he made a name for himself in business. I did locate the grave of his wife, but as I discovered this, I was quite shocked that here was a great Revolutionary War hero whose life as a young man, he was an immigrant from Ireland, was worth no more than two male stags. And from there, I began digging into diaries and documents and early colonial laws and piecing this together. And I also found that historians in their published works have parts of the story, but they're basically too pusillanimous to refer to it for what it is. There's a real problem among historians. They refuse to refer to whites as slaves. It's almost a phobia on their part. You can trace a great deal of their research leading inevitably, pointing in the direction of the fact that whites were slaves, but for reasons of political correctness, they can't bring themselves to use that word. So the footsteps and the tracks of this great mystery can be ferreted out in a number of areas, both in terms of original research, diaries, and letters, as well as in published history.
During the Civil War, let me ask you this, or the war between the states as they call it, the northern abolitionists accused the southern whites of being heartless. But the Confederates, they would counter by claiming that the northern whites held white people in virtual slavery in the factories in the north. What can you tell my audience about the enslavement of white factory workers in America, and in Britain for that matter?
Yes, well, Pastor Peters, that's another suppressed story. It was one of the really great challenges of the Southerners against the North and has gone largely unanswered. The factory system, once again, began in Great Britain during the Industrial Revolution, and it itself was a form of enslavement. Now, we might feel to say, well, the popular image of slavery is on a plantation, and we may be willing to grant the idea that whites were enslaved on tobacco plantations, but how can you say whites were enslaved in a factory? Well, it's very easy because the documentary record shows that they were locked into the factory. The doors were locked. These were largely, by the way, children who were workers in the factories that did the very toughest of the work, both in the northern United States as well as in industrial Britain. They worked under the absolutely most horrendous conditions.
What age of children are we talking about?
We're talking from...
What can you tell my audience about the enslavement of white factory workers in America, and in Britain for that matter?
Yes, well, Pastor Peters, that's another suppressed story. It was one of the really great challenges of the Southerners against the North and has gone largely unanswered. The factory system, once again, began in Great Britain during the Industrial Revolution, and it itself was a form of enslavement. Now, we might feel to say, well, the popular image of slavery is on a plantation, and we may be willing to grant the idea that whites were enslaved on tobacco plantations, but how can you say whites were enslaved in a factory? Well, it's very easy because the documentary record shows that they were locked into the factory. The doors were locked. These were largely, by the way, children who were workers in the factories that did the very toughest of the work, both in the northern United States as well as in industrial Britain. They worked under the absolutely most horrendous conditions.
What age of children are we talking about?
We're talking from an age, depending on the machinery and the type of work, we're talking from as young as 5 years old on up to 14 or 15. So you had that situation where these northern abolitionists, many of them were factory owners. As we know, Frederick Engels was a factory owner, but he claimed to have a tremendous interest in the welfare of poor whites. This seems to be a functional act of hypocrisy on the part of these socialists. William Morris, the arts and crafts socialist in Great Britain, was a strong proponent of this egalitarian society and wanted to use a central government in order to inflict this socialism. Yet if you look at his actual personal life, you discover that he made a fortune off white child labor in the Devon Consols copper mine in Great Britain. So this hypocrisy certainly functioned among the northern abolitionists in the great mill towns such as Lowell, Massachusetts. The white people were severely injured in the machinery. Girls, I have cases where girls would get their hair caught in the machinery, and they would be scalped from the tops of their nose to the back of their heads. As soon as these white children experienced this kind of disability, they were let go. They were fired on the spot. There was no disability insurance or payments or anything like that, and they were left to die of their wounds. So there were no Harriet Beecher Stowe's that had any concern about these white children in the North who were dying in that very horrendous way.
You give an account in your book of a scene in the British Parliament during the time when the British were abolishing black slavery throughout their empire. You contrast the concern of the Parliament with the freeing of black slaves while they heartlessly had cruelty inflicted on the white slaves in England. And can you tell my audience about this?
Yes, that is an incredible story, Pastor Peters. What you have.
Hold that thought, Pastor Peters. Hold that thought. Let's see what we got here. Pastor Peters. Let's take a look at the book. I'm gonna take a look at the chat. Anybody see anything you think we need to read? So much. And because let's see where we are on time. Yeah, I don't want to make the video too long, so we might come back on the and bring up some more stuff about this book. We're gonna get into this. We'll get into the live interview with the author. Let's get some fire emojis in the chat if you got the link to the book already. I want to make sure everybody got it, and some fire emojis if I'm coming through clear and crispy as I should be. Tonight's topic: blank faces. Untold history of white slavery, the forgotten faces of slavery unveiled.
When's we gonna be free? That is a good question, my man. How about nowish?
What happening was here was the House of Lords meeting in a very they were very proud of themselves. They had a tremendous sense of their self-righteousness. They were now going to be freeing the black slaves around their colonies, and this was a badge of their tremendous benevolence. Actually, what it was is a way of assuaging their guilt for what they were doing, the millions and billions that they had made off of the destruction. Actually, what it was is a way of assuaging their guilt for what they were doing, the millions and billions that they had made off of the destruction of the white working classes and the poor classes. And the actual scene is this. Picture the Houses of Parliament, these gilded rooms, and these very wealthy men convening over the welfare and soliciting for the welfare of these black people who were no kin to them. Meanwhile, climbing up the chimney of this House of Parliament were 6- and 7-year-old boys who were going up there, who were enslaved to chimney sweeps, who were being catching cancer from the cinders that were in the chimneys. 6- and 7-year-old boys worked to death in these chimneys. Often the chimneys, not necessarily in the Houses of Parliament, but other chimneys throughout Georgia and Hanover in England, would collapse on these children. Sometimes they were forced up into a chimney that still had a fire in it, because there would be a big banquet going on and there'd be a chimney fire, and they would extinguish the chimney fire, but the chimney was still hot and they wanted to get on with the meal, and they would force the child or beat the child to go up the chimney. Now, many times reformers would, such as Jacob Hanwell, raised reform bills in Parliament to abolish chimney sweeping among children under the age of 10. And Pastor Peters, they could not get that bill passed in Parliament because people like David Ricardo said that it would be an affront to the rights of property.
This is Pastor Peters, and I hope you enjoyed the interview that I had near.
Talk to the house of Israel for a minute, huh? If you're really serious and you're looking for a Christ man, the one who anointed with the Lord, with the Spirit of the Lord, to do his will, I'm that nigga. You not stop faking.
Mike Hoffman, you have written a controversial book about they were white and they were slaves. Yes. How did you come to write this book?
Well, originally I came across a book on white servitude in Virginia by a man named J.C. Bala, and I became very intrigued by his idea that white servitude was not limited to this juvenile kind of sophomoric notion that's pushed in high school, that persons of white background who were put into so-called indentured servitude had a very privileged type of bondage. And
if you're just tuning in, we're now checking out a live interview with Michael Hoffman, author of the book They Were White and They Were Slaves. Please share the live stream, and we do appreciate you tuning in. Tribe. Put some fire emojis if you hear me loud and clear. Game over. The gig is up. You know what I'm talking about? We done figured this shit out. And you know I ain't finna be no slave.
Jack, I can't be no slave, Silky. When's we gonna be free? That is a good question, my man. How about nowish? What a punk. What a fool. Mark.
Talk to the house of Israel for a minute, huh? If you're really serious and you're looking for a Christ man, the one who anointed with the Lord, with the Spirit of the Lord, to do his will, I'm that nigga. You not stop faking.
and that bondage was very temporary, and then it was ended, limited to this.
With another,
I'm very intrigued by
Mike Hoffman, you have written a controversial book about they were white and they were slaves. Yes. How did you come to write this book?
Well, originally I came across a book on white servitude in Virginia by a man named J.C. Bala, and I became very intrigued by his idea that white servitude was not limited to this juvenile kind of sophomoric notion that's pushed in high school, that persons of white background who were put into so-called indentured servitude had a very privileged type of bondage, and that that bondage was very temporary, and then it was ended after a period of 4 or 7 years, and they re-entered the ruling class and went about the job of exploiting black people. J.C. Bala, it's a very thin book of about 100 pages, I believe, raised the point that there were some aspects of white servitude that were consonant with slavery. And so that raised a red flag in my mind. Bala is deceased. It was an older book from, I believe, the 1930s, circa 1930s. And it stimulated something inside of me to say, if one man could say this, maybe others have said it.
No, of course, this kind of white indentured labor is nothing new to Europeans, because in the former Soviet Union or under Tsars in Russia, people basically were serfs, and serfs were tantamount to white slaves. Is there a difference?
There is a difference, I think, in the sense that in Russia, serfdom was very much a formal codified institution. In fact, there were two forms of serfdom. One was the bondage to the land, and the other was part of a formal Russian bureaucracy, which existed inside the government and had a tremendous record-keeping process. So there was a difference in terms of serfdom itself within Russia. But of course, in the larger sense of, were these people slaves? And by slaves, I define it as lifetime bondage, bondage unto death. Yes, they were. And I think it's astute of you to say that this is nothing new, because of course, enslavement of all, yes, they were. Yes, they were. Yes, they were. Were these, and by slaves, I define it as lifetime bondage, bondage unto death. Yes, I define it as lifetime bondage, bondage unto death. Yes, they were. Lifetime bondage. Bondage of you to say that this is nothing new, because of course, enslavement of all people and all races has always been a phenomenon in history. Bondage unto death. Bondage, bondage, bondage unto death. Yes, they were. And I think it's astute of you to say that this is nothing new, because of course, enslavement of all people and all races has always been a phenomenon in history. We can go back to ancient Greece and ancient Rome, where there was always a slave class comprised of white people as well as of other races. We find this in the sections of the Icelandic and Viking sagas in terms of the phrase thrall. You know, nowadays we say you're enthralled to someone. They have a mental power over you. In that era, it meant a physical power over you. And of course, the Bible, contrary to what humanistic misinterpreters of Christianity have alleged, the Bible fully sanctions enslavement. We have had a mistranslation of the King James Bible, which says, servants, be faithful unto your masters, in Ephesians. But in the original Greek, it says, or connotes, the word would be the Latin servus, which means slave. Slaves, be faithful unto your masters. So there is no New Testament or Old Testament prohibition against slavery. In the Old Testament, the prohibition is one of qualification, which is to say, if you are an Israelite, if you are a believer in the one true God of the Hebrews, then you can only be a bondsman to a fellow Hebrew for 7 years. Anything beyond 7 years, in the eyes of the ancient Israelites, was kidnapping. And that law was brought over to New England in the 17th century, because the Puritans tried to keep the Old Testament law in that regard. But in the New Testament, in terms of enslaving people of a non-Christian Israelite background, I don't see that there was any limitation to that. Bringing you up through the Middle Ages, through the thraldom of the Icelandic era and so forth, we also have the Vikings, any limitation to that. In terms of enslaving people of a non-Christian Israelite background, I don't see that there was any limitation to that. In terms of enslaving people of a non-Christian Israelite background, I don't see that there was any limitation to that. Bringing you up through the Middle Ages, through the thraldom of the Icelandic era and so forth, we also have the Vikings conducting really a international trade in the the capture and enslavement of white people. Irish, Norwegians, the Danes would capture the Norwegians in battle and sell them. And actually, there became a capital along the coast of Spain where the Vikings would meet with Arab slavers and sell whites that they had captured and raided to Arabia. And so you have that. And then also in the Middle Ages, you have a phrase that's very interesting in terms of modern usage called villainage or villains, Villeins, which would have been a French Carolinian term and then became anglicized as our modern day bad guy, villain, Villain. And what I found in the course of my research is there was a persistent demonization of poor white people. In other words, in many eras in white society, if you were poor, it was tantamount to being a criminal. And that criminalization was then a connotation for making you a slave. And this slavery, by the way, this villainage, even was hereditary. In the chronicles that I read and the accounts that I read, there was a almost biological taint on children of parents who had been white slaves or villains. So white slaves or villains. Taint on children of parents who had been white slaves or villains. So to summarize, white slaves or villains. White slaves or villains. So to summarize, villains. And children of parents who had been white slaves or villains. White slaves or villains. White slaves or villains. White slaves or villains. So to white slaves or villains. White slaves or villains. So to summarize, I would say that the enslavement of whites, far from being a very brief period in the annals of time, was in fact the universal experience of whites. So now we come to the modern period, and we have this absurd stereotype which denotes black skin with servitude. And it's absurd. It's a folly. So I'm bringing the good news in the annals of time was in fact the universal experience of whites. So now we come to the modern period, and we have this absurd stereotype of whites. Stereotype of whites. Modern period, and we have this absurd stereotype. Modern period, and we have this absurd stereotype denotes black skin with servitude. Denotes black skin with servitude. Denotes black skin with servitude. And it's absurd. It's black people, and it's absurd. It's absurd. It's absurd. It's a folly. So I'm bringing the good news to black people that they are not of any more of a slave race than whites have been. And I'm also bringing good news to white people to say, you don't owe anybody anything. At least not the majority of white people don't. Perhaps the British aristocracy does. Perhaps those who were the heirs of codifying and institutionalizing white slavery in the United States are. However, they were a lot more politic about how they codified it, because in many of the New England rules and regulations for servitude, it would say that this had to be biblical. It had to be limited to 7 years. And that's where we hear in our high school history classes, when they give their minute and a half to the subject, they'll say in regulations for servitude, it would say that this had to be biblical. It had to be limited to 7 years. Not more politic, New England rules and regulations for servitude limited to 7 years. And that's where we hear in our high school history classes say that this had to be biblical. 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 It had to be limited to 7 years. And that's where we hear in our high school history classes, when they give their minute and a half to the subject, they'll say, well, you can't compare white bondage to black slavery because the whites didn't do very difficult work and the enslavement was all over with within 7 years. No way. There were many loopholes and abuses of that law. As you and I know, there can be a law on a piece of paper. That doesn't mean that that's what's lived or brought into action. And for example, if you were a white slave and you did work that was unsuitable, or if you tried to run away, how were they penalized? In some cases by whippings, very onerous whippings. I have found accounts of slave and you did work that was unsuitable, or if you was unsuitable. And I know there can be a law on a piece of paper. That doesn't mean that that's what's lived or brought into action. And for example, if you were a white slave and you did work that was unsuitable, or if you tried to run away, how were they penalized? In some cases by whippings, very onerous whippings. I've found accounts of almost fatal doses of whippings. There's been the recent firestorm of hysteria about this Jewish teenager who was to be caned in Singapore. I believe it was 7 cane strokes, and he was ultimately administered 4. Well, white slaves had to endure hundreds of lashes, and many of them died of that. But another way of penalizing them was to add time onto their length of service. If you ran away a day and died of that. But another way of penalizing them was to penalizing them onto their length of service of lashes, and many of them died of that. Another way of penalizing them was to add time onto their length of service. If you ran away a day, that was a month of additional service. If you ran away for a month, that was a year of additional service. If you stole from your master, that could be months of additional service. If you had a corrupt master and the courts of assize listened more to the master than they did to you, he could have all kinds of trumped up charges against you, as happened in the Caribbean and has happened in the United States and the tobacco plantations. And it meant that in reality, it boiled down to a lifetime of enslavement under the euphemism of indentures.
No. Were these people allowed to marry and have children?
No. A white woman who had a child out of wedlock because she was not allowed to marry, so any child she did have would be out of wedlock. If it was a male child, that child became a slave until the age of majority, and the age of majority was 21 for males. And a female issue from that woman would be a slave unto that woman's master so any child she did have would be out of wedlock. If it was a male child, that child became a slave until the age of majority, and the age of majority was 21 for males. And a female issue from that woman would be a slave unto that woman's master. Male child, that child became a slave until the age of majority, and the age of majority was 21 for males. And a female issue from that woman would be a slave unto that woman's master until the white child was 18.
Now, where did these slaves come from? Where were they drawn from?
Well, primarily from Great Britain. It was remarked in
Now, where did these slaves come from? Where were they drawn from? Where are they drawn from? Where are they drawn from? Where are they drawn from?
Well, primarily from Great Britain. It was remarked in one of the chronicles that I found that Scotland was a veritable industry for white slavery. In the 17th century, white parents were afraid to bring their children to the ports of Scotland for fear of what has come to be known as press gangs. Again, the historians have distorted this and implied that impressment only operated for recruiting people on board British men of war as sailors. That's not true. In the original annals, you find that press gangs operated to kidnap children and adults on board these ships. And it was a veritable industry with the cooperation of the authorities. It began in the very early or the very late Elizabethan era, when the Elizabethan geographer Halkut suggested that the only way they were going to people these plantations was with bondsmen. But the actual machinery of it and where it was really put into effect en masse to people these plantations, when the Elizabethan geographer Halkut suggested that the only way they were going to people these plantations was with bondsmen, came in the Stuart dynasty and to effect en masse. Machinery of it and where it was really put into effect en masse came in the Stuart dynasty and under the King Charles I in the early 17th century.
Let me get some bows and arrows in the chat if you're learning something, man. You know, I haven't tapped in for a minute. He dropping so many jewels that it's really, you know what I'm saying, no need in me interrupting and adding on. He goddamn telling these niggas the same shit we've been telling these niggas for years. You know what I'm saying? That they ain't no motherfucking slaves. You know what I'm talking about? This shit ain't new to us.
Why don't you click your heels together 3 times and go back to Africa?
Jack, I can't be no slave, Silky.
I can't be no slave, Silky. Straight up. Make sure you support the channel, man. We dropping jewels.
Well, it is in a sense that it may be an indictment of the ruling class, but if you study the heroism of the white slave, I don't think that it is necessarily a depressing chronicle, because these people had tremendous spirit. And in the end, the reason why the slavers in the British America switched from whites to blacks is that white slaves were virtually in constant rebellion. As I chronicle in my book, they were white and they were slaves. There were really countless rebellions against bondage. And after a while, when they had a large enough black population in colonial America, they figured we better switch from the whites to the blacks. Now, I'm not suggesting that was a general, coincidental, synchronistic decision that all of them made together as kind of a cabal or a conspiracy. It was nothing so conspiratorial. It was very informal. But in
We're gonna take a moment. We're gonna share the book one more time. Shout out Mac Don. Shout out DJ ZPE. Bro, chill out. Shout out Pequot, American Negro, Eastside 1415, Isaiah Humphrey, Tried and True. Who else new in here? You already know what it is, Taz. You know how we rocking. You know what I'm talking about? Shout out Fishing with Camo Joe in the building. Tribe. Glad to see you made it. I thought I seen some other people. I'll make sure I can shout out everybody. You know what I'm saying? Why don't we take a moment to share the live stream before we continue? You know what I'm saying? See if we can't get a few more people in here to get this sauce. You know what I'm saying? We giving it away, man. And I got another build. We're gonna be building on that adverse possession. We're gonna dig a little deeper into that. If you checked out the last live stream, that shit was real heavy. And also while we're here, don't forget to go subscribe to Aboriginal Powers channel and go get tickets to the live event, Bap vs. Lex Vortex, October 31st. Montezuma meets Shaka Zulu. And I know you niggas ain't finna be goddamn trick-or-treating. You know what I'm saying? Because if you are,
What a punk. What a fool. Mark.
Now, this kind of indentured labor force, was it freed when America gained its independence and the British lost kind of the right to rule, or when did this practice end?
They were not granted their freedom under the United States Constitution, because there is a reference in the Constitution to bondsmen of unspecified races, and there were still people profiting from white bondage. What did end with the beginning of the American Revolutionary War against the British Crown was transportation, which is a technical term used by the British for bringing so-called white criminals from Britain and dumping them in the United States. Benjamin Franklin greatly protested that, and that was in fact one of the colonists' grievances. However, I believe that it was also an alibi, because the Waltham Black Act of 1723 had criminalized a great number of petty misdemeanors and made them capital offenses. In other words, Britain was teeming with a white population of poor people that it couldn't handle, and it needed to get them off the island. So by criminalizing these petty offenses, you were then able to say, we sentence you to death. However, as for stealing a teaspoon or a loaf of bread or cutting down trees on an aristocrat's grounds or poaching a deer, However, as a mercy of the British Crown, we will transport you for life into slavery in the British Crown colony of America. When the American Revolution erupted, the British Crown then had to switch their dumping ground from America to Australia, and that's how Australia was founded. However, servitude is a vast subject. We're only dealing with one aspect of it, because after all, as I believe you remarked to me, you yourself were involved in an indenture program as a young man in Germany.
That's right.
And you didn't feel that it was unfair. You benefited from it. You got some American Revolution aspect of it, because after knowledge, so the system is going in modern times. Who owned whites? It was worse for whites because the ship
Mostly new.
cost, which in the name of apprenticeship and in the name of a temporary biblically based bondage destroyed hundreds of thousands of, and indeed the Holocaust, which in the name of apprenticeship and in the name of a temporary biblically based bondage, and indeed the Holocaust, which in the name of apprenticeship and in the name of a temporary biblically based bondage destroyed hundreds of thousands of white lives in the most heinous circumstances imaginable.
Now, when we talk about slavery, of course, to me, this is mostly new. When we talk about slavery, we talk about these crowded ships coming over from Africa with people dying of diseases, people being kept in the holds of these primitive ships. Was it the same for whites?
It was worse for whites because the ships were not designed to carry human cargo as the slave ships were. They were designed to carry cargo, period, which could be horses, it could be rum, it could be lumber. These ships exhibited a higher rate of fatality for white slaves, as I document in my book, in the Middle Passage, as it's known, than existed for black slaves.
Another topic that you raise is that Indians, North American Indians, actually had slaves.
Yes, the so-called civilized tribes, the Cherokee and the Choctaw, had slave plantations, and they kept black slaves on those plantations.
Indians, North American Indians, actually had slaves.
Yes, the so-called civilized tribes, the Cherokee and the Choctaw, had slave plantations, and they kept black slaves on those plantations. The black cowboy phenomenon comes, and they kept black slaves on those plantations in the South. And this is where the black cowboy phenomenon comes that's now being celebrated.
Now, I know we're going to need a hawk filter for this shit here. Of course, they had black employees, nigga. All right? Don't get your panties in a bundle. They had white employees. They had black employees. Some of them niggas got beat. Some niggas wasn't going for that shit. You know what I'm saying? It's just who you work for. If you work somewhere, nigga, and you got a boss that's going to slap the shit out you, then you're going to get your mark ass slap. Everybody ain't going for that. It's just like now. Just like now. Bitch, go get my coffee. Somebody dealing with that. Not us. Not us. But it's just like a job, bro. Be cool, all right? And if you're scared,
Why don't you click your heels together 3 times and go back to Africa?
As we speak on U.S. 29-cent stamps, the idea that black people had a share in the winning of the West, which racist movie directors in Hollywood have excluded from a fair account of this. Well, in actuality, it is true that blacks were a part of the conquest of the West. However, the part they played was largely punitive as a result of their role as U.S. cavalry soldiers punishing the American Indians. And ironically, because many of these black as U.S. cavalry soldiers punishing the American Indians, result of their role as U.S. cavalry soldiers punishing the American Indians, result of their role as U.S. cavalry soldiers punishing the American Indians. And ironically, because many of these black soldiers were these so-called Buffalo Soldiers, had been slaves of the Indians, they didn't really have a high opinion or a very lovable relationship with those Indians. They didn't really have a high opinion or a very lovable relationship with those Indians. So they were.
so now you got the poor niggas is mad, so they done jump sides. That's all it is, bro. It was a class war. You know what I'm saying? And it just so happened It's just like now, bro. It's just like now. The shit really wasn't as different. You know what I'm saying? As you would think. It's just at that time was the transition. What they say, the Reconstruction, the Great Reset, the Great Immigration, all this shit. Everything was changing. You know what I'm saying? And that's why you see all the old heads, they still got the same vibe. All the old black people still don't like white people. All the old white people still don't like black people. It's still the shit's still in the air because the shit was brand new. You know what I'm saying? You know what? I'm gonna show you how brand new it was. Matter of fact, I think I may have something that goes with this. Let me see. Let me see what I can find here. Let me see what I can find here real quick. Peace to the tribes. If you're just tuning in,
More than willing to.
Hold on. If you're just not tuning in, man, make sure you hit the like and share the live stream. Just take this moment to share the live stream. I'm gonna go find some more exclusive shit that niggas ain't never seen before. Hold on. What did I save that to? That is and my new thing I'm gonna be doing a members only post, and I'm gonna post a thumbnail to the video, and I'm creating a playlist with like all of the different videos that I have pertaining to the topic of whichever video, and I'm gonna do a members only post, and I'm gonna include the playlist so you have all the videos and shit that I reference, and as far as the video is concerned for the research. So because like you know, if you're a subscriber, if you're already hawking, then you know we always provide reading material, visuals, you know what I'm saying? We like to, you know, cover everything, you know, give you a hawk's perspective, you know what I mean? Fly a little higher. So I just have to find which playlist I saved this on because this is actually pertaining to another build, but it actually it may go with this too. Let's see, 1 second here. So much shit, man. So much shit. Shout out to everybody that supports the channel, man. You know, it motivates. I do appreciate it. But you know, we do it for us at the end of the day, man. You know, like niggas can't pay me enough to do this shit, bro. Like the work niggas be doing, bro. This shit it's a lot of work. Shout out to all the niggas who's putting in work. Shout out Aboriginal Power. Shout out Aboriginal TV, Autonomous One, Supreme Chief Holiday. You know what I'm saying? Sister Soul Main Radio. Who else? Empress Holbert. Who else do I know that be dropping shit? Oh, my nigga 111 Truth Searcher. Shout out to him. I just checked out a couple of his bills on Aboriginal Powers channel. He did his thing, so shout out to him. I'm just trying to find a playlist that I put it on. Because I don't want to, you know, backtrack with things that we learn. I want it to be like if you watch the video, then you goddamn, you know, as we advance forward in our studies, all you got to do is follow the goddamn breadcrumbs of the videos. You know what I'm saying? It's basically like a live journal of my research. That's what this channel is really about. You know what I'm saying? I'm just a motherfucking Indian with a lighter, my nigga. You know what I'm saying? And I'm just doing my thing and I'm sharing my research. So this is, I think we'll make this the cherry on top of this build, man. Give you a little insight here. This is volume 7 of South by Northwest, and it tells the story of Seattle's Caton family, descendants of the first black senator, Hiram Revels. Now, as you may recall, when we, I think it was Aboriginal Aristocrats, but we, a few builds back, when we were building on the Southern aristocracy, which they tried to keep a secret from us, we discovered Hiram Revels, black senator. Actually, it was his cousin. You remember his cousin, his little cousin, was one of the niggas ran up on Harper's Ferry and got smoked. He was 24. Okay, so now these are his descendants. Okay, and this is Horace Caton, published in influential Seattle newspaper beginning in 1894, and struggled with the conflict between publishing a paper to appeal to all and his responsibility to advocate for black rights, particularly as the black population in Seattle grew and prejudice grew with it. Now, this is it says the initial $248,000 contract for these films was awarded to Washington State University to produce 5 docudramas based upon the stories of Black Americans in the early Northwest. All right, so, and this is what it say. It was cited for outstanding participation by the American Revolution Bicentennial Administration and won a Corporation for Public Broadcasting Award and a New York Film Festival Award. So, all you back to Africa ass niggas, take that and shove it up in your baboon. You know what I'm talking about? And then, so we're going to check that out. And this is very, very interesting. As you see, it's right along the timeline that we're dealing with. When all this shit goes on, we pretty much figured out what's happening. But I think you'll learn something from this as well. So let's check this out here.
My grandfather, Hiram Revels, was the first black man to ever be elected to the national legislature. He was my mother's father, and in 1870, he was sworn in as a United States Senator from Mississippi. After the Nat Turner insurrection, it became difficult for free Negroes to survive in North Carolina. He went to India to a Quaker seminary and became what he called Senator from Mississippi. To a Quaker seminary and became what he called a religious worker. I never met my grandfather. He died in 1901, 2 years before I was born. We kept his portrait in the dining room of our beautiful home in Seattle.
Well, we won't have that problem if Mr. Roosevelt is reelected, in which case you are looking at the next Governor General of the Philippines.
I'll be there. Really? There is big stick.
At the next Governor General of the Philippines. At the next Governor General of the Philippines.
Well, you got your eye on that, huh? Gonna help Teddy carry his big stick.
In any event, I want to see you at the meeting Sunday.
I'll be there.
Really, Mr. Caton, I don't know what you expect us to do living in those jungles. Couldn't Mr. Roosevelt find some other way of thanking you for helping him get reelected?
Check it out, check it out.
I was named Horace after my father. My younger brother Revels was named after my famous grandfather. In those days, we did everything together. She came from and educated what she wanted to do, like white children. That we live like white children who had the hardest time trying to fulfill. Didn't let it bother us. It was my sister Madge who had the hardest. The dream was that we live like white children. The dream was that we live like white children while ignoring the fact that Negroes were treated differently. Madge tried to please everybody, but my older sister Ruth was different.
Now, this is showing the time when this transition is happening, when they start making all these new Jim Crow laws, when these niggas already been rich, niggas been part of the aristocracy, you know, it's regular Atlantis business. But now shit is starting to change. Now they coming with these laws. Now they coming with these night riders, these red shirts, all this new bullshit. You know what I'm saying? They got motherfucking, they done dump train loads, motherfucking scallywags in this bitch. You know what I'm saying? So now they grew up. Now they got down 30 years old, 25 years old. All right. So this is that time. 1894 is when he had the newspaper, because we paint a picture so we can see what's going on. That's why I say niggas try to have us way to fucking Egypt talking about 20,000 years ago. No, what the fuck happened to our property, our land? How did they get my granddaddy house? We don't give a fuck about none of that other shit, my nigga. I don't know what you other niggas riding for. You know what I'm talking about? Straight up.
When's we gonna be free? That is a good question, my man. How about nowish?
Gotta be
What kind
kidding
of
me.
Indian are you?
Like Tonto Indian?
Shinnecock Indian.
Really? You're a Shinnecock?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know you're a Shinnecock.
Could have fooled me.
That's the kind I am.
Hey.
So you should be Big Chief Bastard, not Old Dirty.
His family was here when Columbus landed, huh?
Is that right?
Yes.
So you are not a black man, you're an Indian?
I'm an Indian.
No kid.
Because we came from an educated family with white kids to have fun. She never felt she had special obligations because we came from an educated family. If white kids wanted to play with her, she would. And if the white kids called her names, she would fight. She would. And special obligations because we came from an educated family. If white kids wanted to play with her, she would. And if the white kids called her names, she would fight.
Do you really live on Capitol Hill? Yeah, my grandfather's a U.S. Senator. Senator of what? Do you really live on Capitol Hill? Yeah, my grandfather's a U.S. Senator. Senator of what? United States Senate. I think he's lying. First he came to school with a servant. Now you say your grandfather's a senator.
Yeah. Why don't you go up on a hill and play with the girls? We don't want to play with you.
Years later, when Negro History Week was inaugurated, I was able to take pride in my heritage. But until then, I learned to keep it a secret.
Good evening, Miss May. Good evening, Mr. Casey. Mr. Walker? Dr. Washington, we are very pleased and honored to have you as a guest in our home.
The pleasure is all mine, Mrs. Kate.
Mr. Casey.
One day, the famous educator, Dr. Booker T. Washington, came to Seattle, and it was only natural that he should stay with our family.
I know. Dr. Washington, I don't see much hope for our people in the South. Sometimes I even question your own work when you advise Southern Negroes to educate themselves in order to become laborers.
Well, doubtless many of our men are just afraid to leave the South, or else they don't have the same pioneer spirit that you and your friends in the city do. Besides, we can't all leave. If we do, then the North will soon be just like the South. And as for my work, the things I teach them they can use any place they go.
Doctor, I know that most of us have to start at the bottom and work our way up to the top. But don't you see that that's just what the Southern white wants to hear? It gives them an excuse to keep us on the lowest possible level. It robs the Negro of his... It robs us of all our ambition.
Mr. Caton, may I say that you have forgotten much of the South. The majority of our people live in the South. They don't leave because they love it. It's their home. The Negro problem will be won or lost in the Deep South, not up here in the Northwest.
Most of my family lives in the South. When I came north, I had hopes and dreams about freedom we hear so much about. But what I found is that without a trade or position, the Negro might just as well go back home. But don't you think the Negro can be uplifted by being exposed to the things we have in the cities?
like the libraries, the symphony, the opera.
You know, I've been reading about Dr. Du Bois and his Niagara movement. And I must say, if you will excuse me, Doctor, that I'm much more prone to his way of thinking than yours. The idea of the Negro in the Southern white's mind is simply an insanity. There's nothing to be gained with compromising with that attitude.
You say that here in the city you found a new frontier, that democracy can be worked out. And you speak of the insanity the Negro finds in the South. I say we are all looking for the same solvable answer, to which there is no simple solution. I hope that insanity doesn't find its way to this part of the country, because if it does, I'm afraid you may find you've been living in a fool's paradise. In any case, I better retire. Please excuse me, I'm very tired.
I'll show you to your room.
May I say good night? Good night, Doctor.
Nah, we just gonna put a little hot filter on this thing real quick. Do notice that these niggas is not feeling Booker T. Washington and the shit he talking. They not feeling him. But see, he want niggas to learn a trade so they could come work in the motherfucking factory so he could be like these motherfuckers with his homeboys at the goddamn lodge. These niggas ain't feeling it. Put some bows and arrows in the chat if you're learning something.
I think he's wrong, John. It's like Du Bois says, you have to strike out in every direction. I believe in this country. I love it. We've succeeded here. I believe that you can force democracy to work.
It's true. We've succeeded. But he's a smart man, Horace. A very, very smart man. I hope what he says doesn't come true.
It's clear to me that hope is just about all we really have.
Good evening, Mr. Caton.
Good evening, Mr. Caton.
I don't think you'll ever stop acting as if you've just published your first issue.
I hope I never do.
Good evening, Mr. Caton.
Good evening, Miss.
Tonight we are having roast leg of lamb, sir.
And this smells delicious.
Thank you.
Samuel Hill has recently...
Where my nigga Aboriginal Power when I need him? You don't see this little thing, his motherfucking, is they servant? Pay attention, they dropping jewels. $250,000 production.
I hope I never do.
Good evening, Mr. Caton.
Good evening, Miss.
Tonight we are having roast leg of lamb, sir.
And this smells delicious.
Thank you.
Samuel Hill has recently imported 18 splendid specimens of the Negro race from North Carolina and has set them to work on his farm, but will soon start them out for themselves. Mr. Hill always did have his own peculiar way of doing things.
Isn't there an editorial in here, folks?
Well, man, I've asked you not to address your father. Yeah. There it is. Discrimination in downtown restaurants. Page 6.
That a dismaying number of establishments in the downtown portion of our city have adopted the odious practice of refusing service to Negro patrons.
I can't imagine what your white readers must think about these race articles.
I'll tell you what they're thinking. They're thinking stick to the war news.
Right? Now, any editor spends all of this time worrying about what his readers thought. We'll never get a newspaper out.
Providing he's got readers.
I don't know why anyone would want to go to the white people's restaurant in the first place.
The Republican will always have readers. That's half the reason someone buys a paper.
Providing he's got readers.
I don't know why anyone would want to go to the white people's restaurant in the first place.
The Republican will always have readers. That's half the reason someone buys a paper. Find something to get all steamed up about.
You might not think it's important to eat in white folks' restaurants, but I think it's important to eat any place.
They might sit you down. You don't know if you're colored or what. Well, probably the people who eat in these restaurants aren't interested in this type of article.
Worrying about your Hoffman is newspaper. Did you know this city has grown from 80,000 to 250,000 in the last 20 years? Now, a lot of those new people are moving in are Negroes. They want a newspaper that won't weasel word around on these racial issues. Even if it does put some of our white friends off a little at first.
Dinner is now being served.
Great.
My God. Say the man's name for me. Yes? Now, how soon can you send me a dispatch on this? Yes, we'll make the next edition. No, what the whole thing. And better to talk to some of those police down there and find out what they're doing on it. Yeah? All right. Okay, thank you. Fred.
Yeah.
Show me that makeup on the front page, will you?
Well, we got the...
Fred, get your ass over here. Come do some motherfucking work. Straight up. Y'all see what's going on over here?
Giving you more of what you hoping for. You ain't hoping in the Lord, huh? You hoping in vain, material, superficial shit. That's why you can't see me, house niggas. I hate to come at you like you own me, but goddamn it, you do, motherfucker.
Robbery story running over here on the right, and on the left we have the French story.
Put that French stuff on the inside. I want a new story right in here.
Something just break? I don't suppose I have to tell you. We're taking a hell of a chance with this one.
No, I don't suppose you have to tell me.
Dad?
Tied to a tree and burned alive. My God.
Lynched in Mississippi for suspected robbery? Is it true, Dad?
There were witnesses who knew the man was innocent. They were suppressed.
The lynching spirit of the United States, to say the least, is an awful blot on our boasted civilization. This newspaper can no longer ignore the shocking violations of human rights, which are the culmination of the denial of civil rights for Negroes.
Hello, Mother. Good evening. A brilliant display of... Wait here, children.
Good evening, my dear. I hope you left a few things at the store for the other shoppers.
I'd like to speak to you, Mr. Caden.
You disapprove, Susan?
Do you really think people want to read about this sort of thing?
I think they've got to.
But lynchings, Horace? I don't even want our own children to read about it. This is what people moved to Seattle to get away from. People want to read about this sort of thing?
I think they've got to.
But lynchings, Horace? I don't even want our own children to read about it. This is what people moved to Seattle to get away from.
Oh, yes, the city. Cultural uplift, concerts, and libraries. You know, I think it's about time you woke up to the fact that string quartets aren't going to save the Negro race.
Good evening.
Hello, Mr. Caden, here.
He certainly is in. May I know who's calling?
The government of the United States is calling.
I'd always imagined a larger organization. Come in, gentlemen, come in.
Would you like to sit down?
No, thank you. We'd like to have you come down to our office, if you don't mind, Mr. Caton. We'd like to talk to you about your newspaper.
What is it?
I'll just be spending some time in the company of these gentlemen, my dear. No cause for alarm. I'll be back as soon as our business is complete. Right, gentlemen?
Oh,
Oh, there you are. Must have been a long night. Where have you been? We're almost going to send out a search party for you.
Too long for my taste. I had a visit from a couple of government men. Looks like that Mississippi story is creating more excitement than I'd like.
You telling me?
Two fools kept me up all night asking me if I was trying to start a race riot in Seattle. And they didn't want to debate it either. Just scare the pants off you and wear you down till you promise that you're going to be a good boy. What's all that?
Telegram in the back, too.
Cellular edition of Friday last was an affront to the decency and unity of a country at war for democracy. Please cancel my subscription directly. Irresponsible outrage. Cancel that. Well, my God. Since when is reporting an outrage the same thing as committing one? Our enlightened Northerners. Opposed to lynching them and twice as opposed to hearing about it. Well, Fred, I think we've gone and done it. Put the future of this paper right on the shoulders of the Negro readers. I never intended this to be a specialized paper, but I guess there's no harm in helping the people when they're down. Let's get to work.
There was to be no future for the Seattle Republican. 3 months after the Mississippi lynching story was printed, the paper ceased publication forever.
Rebels, what are you doing?
Dad?
Oh, Nish. I'm so sorry you won't be coming along with us. But since we've decided to move to a smaller house for a while,
I understand, Mrs. Caton. A house of lesser size is easier to maintain than a house that is more crowded.
I doubt that a house of any size will be easy for me to maintain. I just hope I've learned something from you. Will you write to us from California?
I will be your faithful correspondent, ma'am. A house of lesser size is easier to maintain than a house that is more crowded.
I doubt that a house of any size will be easy for me to maintain. I just hope I've learned something from you. Will you write to us from California?
I will be your faithful correspondent, madame.
Thank you, Nish.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Hello, troops.
Hi, Father.
Hello, Mrs. Caton.
Well, I have a bit of news. I have acquired an investment property.
Where, in Green Lake?
No, I've thrown Green Lake out of my mind. The whole place is overvalued and taxes are pure felony. 5 years from now, a lot of investors will be sorry they ever heard of Green Lake. No, the place I've found is an apartment house right in town, a well-trafficked location down on 22nd near Jackson.
Oh. Well, it's right in the heart of town. Convenient for people.
22nd and Jackson. I think you'd be afraid to go down there.
Nonsense. Why should I be afraid?
Well, there's so many Negroes. What will our white friends say?
Ruth, is dinner ready? Oh. Well, it's right in the heart of town. Convenient for people.
22nd and Jackson. I think you'd be afraid to go down there.
Nonsense. Why should I be afraid?
Well, there's so many Negroes. What will our white friends say?
Ruth, is dinner ready?
Almost, Mother.
Now, my father was the best farmer in all of Mississippi. Best in the land, some said. He could produce twice the crop of somebody with 4 times the land. You know, one time he produced a crop so fine that all the farmers in the township chipped in and gave this big dinner to celebrate.
Who came to the dinner? White and colored farmers?
Oh, just white. There weren't many colored people who had land in that township.
You mean your father was allowed to eat and sit with white people down in Mississippi?
Well, I guess I had a table for him. Off to the side.
Guest of honor, sitting at some little Jim Crow table.
Celebrated and segregated.
Sitting at some little Jim Crow table. And sit with white people down in Mississippi.
Well, I guess they had a table for him. Off to the side.
Guest of honor, sitting at some little Jim Crow table.
Celebrated and segregated. All in one night.
Rebels, you shouldn't talk to Father that way. And Mother, you shouldn't let him.
I've always taught you to respect your father. Mother, Mr. Caton, be careful with that china. Rebel, Horace Jr., help him with that thing. It's too heavy.
Are these?
Put them on the truck.
All right.
Oh, my. Here. Give me the china. Give me the china. Help them tie those back down. Rebel, get that.
Okay, now what's going on is this Jim Crow shit is just happening. This shit new. This nigga young. He ain't feeling the shit. He's storming in that shit. Fuck you talking about I can't come in here. I go anywhere I want to. You know what I'm talking about? You know, some real nigga shit. You know what I'm saying? Fuck you talking about I can't come in here.
Jack, I can't be no slave, Silky.
You that newspaper editor's son? I never expected to see you in here. What's the charge?
They told me I caused a disturbance in the theater. They wouldn't let me sit downstairs because I was colored. I sat there anyway and they had me arrested.
Call your dad. There he is. Take him home and tell him to be more careful in the future.
Tell him to obey the law like I always have done.
Horace.
According to his story on the phone, he's broken the law, Jim, and you know it.
You're right, damn it. But you know as well as I do that things have changed around town. It's not my fault and it's not yours. Things just ain't the way they were when you and I were pioneers in this town. You'd better teach your boy a little patience.
There's no law that says that a man can't sit anywhere he wants in a theater in Seattle. And you know I know.
Okay, you're the doctor. Take him home.
It's different now. Times have changed. You said that we were just like other people and that this was a free country. Said I should insist on my rights. What did you expect me to do?
I expect you to keep fighting. Not like you're doing it now. Keep still and settle down. There's a lesson to be learned. I don't know what you're around up. I was born a slave, Horace. So was my grandfather.
Your mother doesn't like to talk about it except when it suits her to remind me. It's more enlightening hearing about your grandfather rebels, which is unfortunate because it pulls you away from your own people. First thing I ever remember was listening to the slaves talking about freedom. I was called Freedom Child because it was coming, and I was called Freedom Child. I was called Freedom Child because it was coming, and we all believed it. My father was lucky because my mother was white and he got some land and could farm it. Not many people that lucky. I found out that freedom and learning don't mean much in Mississippi, so I moved here. I believed in myself, Horace. I believed that I had the ability to compete with any man.
So now you're saying that you're not...
saying that I failed. See, it's not an easy thing to say to you, but maybe it has to be. Freedom's a word, not a fact. That's defeated, even at home. But you gotta prepare yourself to go on fighting. You're gonna have to create your own life, Horace. I can help a little, but it's up to you. Son, what I'm gonna say to you is how it's gonna be. Either you go back to school, or else you find a job. You go to school or you go to work and you forget about this damn senseless troubles between the races.
Your daddy's right, boy. Things are changing so fast, we're going to have to alter our tactics. Be patient for a while.
I can't just be patient.
Son, you better get away from this place for a while.
But don't you realize you made our family the way it is now? But you don't tell me what to do.
You're too young, I know it ain't easy for me to say this in front of your dad. But my advice to you is to go see some of this world. Have some time to think. When you come back, maybe things won't look so bad.
But I don't know where to go.
It don't matter where you go. Just take a trip.
Horace? Oh. Don't forget us. I know you'll be all right. Man. Horace?
Yes.
I have something for you.
Thank you.
Remember to write.
For the great new territory of Alaska to find out what my life had in store for me. This way, I moved from the confusion of youth into my manhood. I now know who I am. I am a Black American.
So we have style, we got flavor, we got rhythm. I mean, the black man in America is the most copied man on this planet, bar none. Everybody want to be a nigga, but nobody want to be a nigga. How about that question?
I'm ready.
How can black people rise up and overcome?
How can they rise up and overcome? Well, can they?
That is correct.
Respect, but this is business that needs to be taken care of, you know. Slap on the back is all fine and dandy. Yeah, but it needs promotion. It needs promotion. It needs